Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, COVID is weighing heavily on the U.S. and several new variant strains are hitting the nation as well. Three, in fact, that are concerning a lot of researchers because they don't really know what they're going to do, especially mutating with the existing strain of COVID. Nasty side effects are being reported from the vaccinations, and also we're seeing a surge in warlike activities amongst the nations. Well, we start off today with Johnson & Johnson is asking the FDA to approve its single-dose vaccine by the end of the month, adding yet another vaccine to the coronavirus, to the market. The vaccine from Johnson & Johnson doesn't need the cold stores like Pfizer and says that it is 100% effective after a month against hospitalizations and deaths. Those reports according to the trials. Now, if approved, the FDA says that Johnson & Johnson could ship 100 million doses of the vaccine within the next few months.
Well, currently the coronavirus is continuing to mutate and spread among the population. Now, the more it mutates, the more likely it is to become a dangerous strain. There are three strains in the U.S. that scientists are worried about. Now, Ashley Jackson was widowed earlier due to the loss of her husband from one such mutation. After 8 years of marriage and 2 children, Alfron Z.A. Jackson died with his wife, only able to watch through a window, of course not wanting that mutation to spread to other people.
That's right. Well, Mr. Jackson's case started with flu-like symptoms, but he tested negative initially for COVID. Then he got short of breath. After going to the emergency rooms, doctors said his heart was failing. Well, after a few days, doctors tested him again. Well, the health departments called and informed his wife after the results were back and letting her know that he was the first person in Alabama to test positive for the UK strain of COVID. Well, that strain was first detected in the United Kingdom due to a national effort for mutations, testing for mutations. And the strain that Mr. Jackson died of had become more contagious and potentially more lethal.
Well, detecting variants early on is critical to helping to slow the spread. Now, in the UK, they sequenced 12,000 samples for mutations per week. Well, in the US, they were sequencing only 5,000 per week. Dr. Jennifer Dienbard said that it's highly likely that there are variants that we are not picking up. Now, Dr. Dienbard is the director of a lab at the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. Now, she sequences samples from all over LA County, but she said that labs like hers aren't getting or sharing data at a national level. So basically what all that was saying is that there could be a lot more variants than we realize because they're not checking everywhere.
Right, yeah. Well, she also said how it's important for states to communicate their findings to recognize different strains sooner. Mrs. Jackson said that Alabama hadn't seen that variant in their state until they detected it in 3 people, one including her husband. Well, Mr. Jackson wasn't known to have any previous pre-existing conditions. He wore his mask. He only went from home to work and then back home again, and he really didn't interact with many people in the last several months. Yet, Alphonse died in his mid-30s.
So despite sounding like following all recommendations, he still came down with this highly contagious strain of the coronavirus.
That's right.
Well, South Carolina is also dealing with a variant strain of COVID-19, but this one is not from the UK, but instead it's from South Africa. Now, the governor there is asking people not to panic as 2 people have been found to be infected with the South African variant. South Carolina now ranks second in the U.S. for new COVID cases per capita. Dr. Brannon Taxler said in an interview with CBS Evening News, "This is just another reminder that the fight against this deadly virus is far from over." Now, the 2 adults who tested positive were from 2 separate parts of the state and had no recent travel history, and in fact, no interaction with one another either, but both came down with the South African strain.
Yeah, and of course, as a result, that's puzzling a lot of experts because they're wondering how did that virus get from South Africa to the U.S. and then to these 2 separate people and infect them.
Right.
So,
If there would be a travel history, that would be the key, but
Sure.
no travel history, 2 totally separate people, and again, very puzzling for doctors and scientists to figure out where did this come from, how did it get here.
So I'm sure they're probably using some form of contact tracing to kind of backtrack and see if they can, but as of yet, they have not found anything.
Right.
Well, former CDC Director Dr. Tom Frieden said the more uncontrolled spread of virus there is in this country or anywhere in the world, the more likely there is that strains will emerge and spread which are either more infectious or more lethal. Well, National Institutes of Health researchers found that pregnant women who experienced severe COVID symptoms had a higher risk for complications during and after pregnancy, including cesarean sections and preterm birth. Also, nursing homes reported deaths in New York earlier in the COVID crisis. Apparently, those numbers were about 50% higher than previously reported, and that is according to a report from the Attorney General.
And they were hit pretty hard, so now they're saying that it actually was very underestimated, the amount of deaths that came from those nursing homes. Well, Phoenix-based surgeon Argavan Solis said in a recent tweet regarding the toll that the virus is taking on families, he said, "Here are the folks I've cared for with COVID who have died," showing a big stack of papers, and the ones that survived, showing a little stack in the last 2 months. Now, Dr. Argavan said that people have become numb to the number of COVID-related deaths reported, and she thought that that image showing the actual this many I cared for that have died, this many had survived, would actually make it more realistic to people that yes, we are dealing with this virus.
Right. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and like she mentioned that, a lot of people are kind of become numb to hearing these big numbers thrown out, but, having something that they can see, and a lot of times when it hits home, it kind of makes more of an impression in a person's mind. Right. Well, amidst all the variants, the U.S. has been in a race to vaccinate. Over 1.3 million people have been vaccinated per day in the last 7 days. And FEMA is pledging more money to states for vaccination sites. Well, why the race? Well, for example, hospitals in Southern California have been so overwhelmed that the U.S. military has been sent in to help. First Lieutenant Lana Bagwell was deployed to a hospital in Southern California, and while she was there, she commented on how amazing the strength of the healthcare workers are who are dealing with this COVID virus, COVID-19, day in and day out. Well, she was one of 100 military personnel who were sent there by the Department of Defense.
Well, the primary residency of the community she's been deployed in is primarily Latino, a group of people who have seen infection rates soar 1,000%, a rate LA County's health director calls horrifying. Now, the new UK variant has now been detected in 30 states. To top that off, variants from South Africa and Brazil have also been showing up in the U.S., troubling scientists. As a result, the vaccines could be less effective against them. Now, Brown University School of Public Health Dean Dr. Asia Jha said, "If more Americans, particularly older Americans, aren't vaccinated, we could see a spike in infections, hospitalizations, and deaths." And as Dr. Jha said there, with the spike, these new strains, they don't know if the vaccinations have any effect whatsoever on them. The virus might have mutated so much that the vaccination they are getting currently, it will mean nothing. It'll just have no effect on these mutations.
Yeah, and worst case scenario could make it worse. Well, and from the American Academy of Pediatrics, a new finding showing COVID cases among children are up 12% in the last 2 weeks. Of the almost 50 million vaccinations distributed, over 26 million have received their first dose, and less than 6 million have gotten their second dose. Dr. Fauci said that all doses need to be distributed immediately, and those who have received their first dose will be priority in line for the receiving of their second dose.
Now, there's a new at-home over-the-counter testing device being made available for COVID with roughly a 95% accuracy and a response within 15 minutes.
Well, we're going to turn it over now to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has a little bit more information for us in regards to some of the hospitalizations that, scientists are saying that they are down. But of course, we still had a huge deadly month in the month of January for COVID cases, and some of the side effects that people have been getting from the vaccinations as well. Larry, what do you have for us in regards to what's taking place in and around COVID-19?
Those accustomed to the nightmarish ups and downs of the globe's epidemics and calamities are finding disappointment in the latest plague which has awoken over a year later, and the COVID curse is not only still present, but it is worsening as it revitalizes and becomes stronger. There seems to be no credible hope of a letting up this time, as 94,000 were reported dead in the U.S. for the first Roman month due to COVID-related complications, even as greater calamities are fastly maturing and threatening to break onto the scene. Slews of mutations cropping up newly have been a challenge for each successive generation for quite some time, but they have never posed as great a problem and caused as much trouble as they are presently. And one man afflicted with COVID, the disease is said to have undergone 20 mutations in his body alone, a phenomenon which scientists are erroneously attributing to evolution, neglecting the proven impact and effect that lifestyle exerts on the behavior of the virus. CDC officials are now recommending double masking to prevent inhaling the virus, even as the U.S. reports that it has successfully injected 10% of its population with the virus in vaccinal form. As might have been reasonably expected, deaths have followed vaccinations, including the latest one involving a California man who died just 3 hours after being inoculated. The profitable push for mass vaccinations is starting to be met with public skepticism by those responsible for vaccinating, after taking an educated look at the information being released by companies like Pfizer concerning their vaccines. Healthcare professionals are voicing safety concerns and refusing the shot. In Orange County in California, 30% of healthcare professionals have refused vaccination, and in Riverside County, that percentage rose to 50%. The workers cited various reasons for declining, including pregnancy and the fact that some of them have already been infected by the virus. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Tom Jeff, back to you.
Now, that last report that Larry gave, that must be troubling to some people, seeing actually the healthcare workers who are the ones that are supposed to be in the know on the vaccinations and what's going on, refusing to take or get vaccinated.
Yeah.
You know, that has to be troubling to some, because they're wondering, well, why are they not taking it, and should I follow suit? So, of course, some people are experiencing the terrible side effects, but now you have healthcare workers refusing to get vaccinated as well.
Yeah.
Well, have you ever wondered how coronavirus has been mutating and why the mutations are more?
It doesn't take much for a mutation to begin and start spreading more rapidly.
Right, and as the video shows us, just how that mutation takes place and just why these vaccines are and might not have any effect against these mutations.
Sometimes doing more harm than benefit. Well, while the new American president has only been in office for 3 weeks, he is making it clear where he stands on the international front. President Joe Biden has pushed to build up NATO forces in Europe to Cold War levels, but it seems like that is only the beginning.
While it is not uncommon for NATO to run drills on European soil, things do seem to be escalating. In October, German troops were preparing to be transferred to Lithuania in 2021. Now, NATO calls the operation Enhanced Forward Presence, and more than likely, those troops are now in place.
But Lithuania is not the only country with a NATO presence. Further south in Ukraine, there is a much more apparent U.S.-led NATO force in the country that is not a NATO state. NATO Secretary General Hans Stoltenberg recently gave this update to the press on that situation. He said, just over the last few weeks, we had actually 3 U.S. naval ships deployed in the Black Sea, also exercising and training with the Ukrainian Navy. We have more policing presence in the air and also on land with more training and being active in the region, end quote.
Well, some might argue these maneuvers are purely for defense, but to Russia, it looks more like NATO is creeping up to their backyard. President Vladimir Putin defended Russia's stance to the international press back in December, saying, quote, "We heard your statement to which claimed that NATO will not be present in the East, but you didn't hold on to your promises. Yes, these were oral statements, not written ones, but you did nothing," end quote.
But President Putin continued, there were 2 waves of NATO enlargement, and NATO military structure comes closer to our borders. Shouldn't we react? Well, during their first phone conversation, President Biden warned the Russian leader not to make any moves that would harm American national interests, the White House reported. And that warning, is being sent with military might to back it up. Just this week, the U.S. announced for the first time ever it will be sending B-1 bombers to be stationed in Norway.
Well, to add to all of this, a U.S. strategic commander is using strong rhetoric, saying we are on the brink of war with Russia and China. Now, according to RT News, the 4-star Admiral Charles A. Ritter stated, quote, "The U.S. military must shift its principal assumption from nuclear employment is not possible to nuclear employment is a very real possibility and act to meet and deter that reality."
Not everyone agrees with the Admiral's warning. In an interview with RT, former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter says, if the United States dare uses nuclear weapons against Russian forces or on Russian soil, the Russians will have no choice but to respond. This is what makes the Admiral's statements about preparing for nuclear war so dangerous, because there is no way of containing it. If there is a nuclear war between the United States and Russia, it will be a general nuclear war, which means not only will both nations be annihilated, but the world will also be destroyed as we currently know it.
Well, Mr. Ritter went on to explain, because the U.S. has identified these countries as adversaries, America has seen the need to build up their conventional weapons to, as he puts it, adequately contain the threat they pose both in Europe in terms of the Russians and in the Pacific in terms of the Chinese. However, because America does not have the conventional military force to come out the sure winner, Ritter says, should there be a conflict, nuclear weapons would probably have to be employed on the part of the United States, and more than likely to try to get the upper hand. Right. Quickly in the very beginning.
Yeah, we know with the deployment of nuclear weapons, there pretty much is no going back after that, because every country that's involved is going to want to prevent the annihilation of their country, and as a result, other countries will get involved being allies with countries that are being fired upon, and then, as many of the experts says, it's going to just be an all-out global nuclear catastrophe. Right. Well, there is yet a third country the U.S. Considers its enemy, who has now publicly announced they could pursue a nuclear weapon if they are pushed. Mahmoud Alavi, Iran's intelligence minister, issued the warning on SEMA News, saying, if a cat is cornered, it may show a kind of behavior that a free cat would not. If Iran is pushed in that direction, then it wouldn't be Iran's fault, but those who pushed it. Under normal circumstances, Iran does not have such a program and intent at all.
Well, but these are not normal circumstances. Just before Alavi warned its adversaries, Iran announced it is now enriching uranium, very close to military grade, and its scientists are currently researching the metal's capabilities. Now, even though the intelligence minister says Iran's nuclear program is peaceful, those steps are headed in the direction many fear that will give Iran a nuclear bomb. Now, Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei issued a ruling forbidding a nuclear weapon. However, he left room to reverse the decision if Iran is pressured.
And it seems that Iran probably feels like it is that cat pushed in the corner, not only on the nuclear front, but on many other fronts, particularly economically, because of the many sanctions that the United States has placed on them.
That's right, and they've been suffering quite a while with those sanctions, as you mentioned, which has really hurt the economy, and they're struggling, which is many times the case, and that's the reason for those sanctions, to make the country suffer, to try to get what you want.
That's right. Well, we have one more video to show you before we close out. Senator Ted Cruz was talking to New York Judge Anthony Blinken, who is up for the new administration Secretary of State. We can see from Judge Blinken's answers that this administration is determined to maintain strong ties with Israel. Please watch.
Do you agree that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel? And do you commit that the United States will keep our embassy in Jerusalem?
Yes and yes.
Thank you. Do you agree that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel? And do you commit that the United States will keep our embassy in Jerusalem?
Yes and yes.
Thank you. Do you agree that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel? And do you commit that the United States will keep our embassy in Jerusalem?
Yes and yes.
Thank you.
So as we just saw there, Katan, Senator Ted Cruz asking the questions, basically asking Anthony Blinken if he agrees with those decisions that were made. He said yes. So it seems as if nothing is going to change, from what the previous administration had set forward regarding that embassy staying in Jerusalem. So that's one part of these, just a big key to what we see taking place in this time period. But as we mentioned before that with the articles, United States preparing for war with Russia and China, two big, very big nuclear countries, very powerful countries. And as the Admiral said there, they're starting to shift their stance from, is this going to be a possibility to it's very real and we better be able to stop it or deter it. But then we went on to talk about the effects of that nuclear war when that does take place, that it's going to be very quick and very severe.
Oh, yes, for sure. And then, with Israel also being tied with the United States and being an ally, that's going to not only stay between the United States and Russia, but that's going to escalate and involve Israel. We know that there's been a lot of ongoing tension between Israelis and the Palestinians. So far, even though many have tried, there has not been an agreement between the two countries, the two states to actually work together. Now, I know that's been the goal for a long period of time, and every administration kind of makes it their goal to actually bring peace between those two nations, but so far they haven't been able to. But as we know, and we've heard from many reports before, that's still the target that we want to accomplish. So we'll see, but we know that we are heading a lot closer to the imminent nuclear war at this present rate. So.
Right, and the new president we see, new United States President, President Joe Biden coming in, now stationing for the very first time these bombers over there, very close in that area, right in Russia's back door, so to speak. So not sending a great feeling to President Vladimir Putin. And of course, that's going to escalate things altogether. So as you mentioned, we'll see where it goes from here, but definitely moving in the direction to that all-out nuclear war.
That's right.
Well, if you'd like to learn more about these stories, contact the House of Yahweh. When you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to yahweh.com, yisraelhawkins.com, or yahwehsbranch.com. You can visit our website by going to ypnnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And as we've mentioned previously, don't forget to visit the websites that will aid you in the study of the scriptures that you can find by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another message from Yisrael Hawkins that you will definitely want to hear. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.